we've got a small group here today, but I'm hoping to get through some of the material. Since we have such a small group, I'd like to make it as interactive as possible. ShmooCon rules do apply, so if you see something, call BS. If you see something that doesn't make sense, call it out. And if you've got a story to share on how you overcame a problem, please share it with the group. I'm not the only one here that has these struggles, and I'm not the only one here that has the right answer to overcome these struggles. So with that, I'm Jack. I've been coming to these cons for years. I love the InfoSec community. I've been able to benefit so much from what I've been able to get from others sharing with me, and this is my opportunity to share back with the community. And the real goal is to really spawn some conversations. If I say something here that intrigues you or sparks an interest, please contact me. I'd love to share more of what I've done. Or if you've got an example of how you've overcome a problem that I haven't quite solved right, please, help me out, because I'm looking for help too to improve my program. So last year I was here and I spoke about getting back to the basics and how I operationalized security and brought it back into IT operations. It kind of embedded security in the server and desktop teams, and how I was able to kind of overcome the fundamental challenges. And at that talk, I promised if I was invited back, I would talk about the thing I was working on at the time, which was our big data governance initiative. Following that same idea. Data governance is kind of locked up in like legal, audit, and security. And how do we move that back to make it kind of more operationalized and put it in the hands of the data handlers, the people who work with the data every day? It was the same idea I took with kind of getting back to basics with security. Put security back in the hands of the people who build and maintain the systems every day. So I'm following the same process here around data governance. So the problem statement. This started 2 years ago from a talk with Jack Nichelson. And he gave a great talk about, do you really understand what you're protecting and the value of it to the organization? Not what you think it is, but do you really understand the material impact of what you're protecting? I had a great conversation with him after the convention, and he really kind of took me to task. I gave him kind of the boilerplate answers. Yeah, I know what my company does. I know what's important to my company. And he really started kind of pulling the threads and picking the pieces apart. And then he really started challenging me on, am I following compliance to protect my data? Or am I really focused in on protecting the right stuff? Then I was like, well, how am I going to get started? How do I get people behind me? And he was like, you just have to go. You've got to start walking. Start on the path yourself. Others will follow behind you. So everyone's got the same challenge. How do we make sure that we can articulate what the data is we're protecting, why we're protecting it, what's the value of it, and who should have it? So, the Beefeaters. The Beefeaters Guard are the elite guard at the Tower of London in charge of protecting the crown jewels. All this is a hook. So I wanted to try to put data governance back in the hands of the people who use the data. When I'd send out meeting requests and be like, hey, let's talk about data classification. Well, that's really loud though. But it's too low on there. All right, so how do we get people excited about data governance? Data governance is boring. So when I'd be like, hey, come to this meeting, we're talking about data classification, everyone was busy. But then when I'd send out an email and I'd be like, you have been selected to be a member of an elite guard, the Beefeaters Guard, entrusted with protecting our crown jewels, and the FBI is going to do your counterintelligence training. Everyone had time to talk about data classification, and they all showed up. So the idea was the Beefeaters is just the hook. And it's kind of that thing like loose lips sink ships. And back during World War II, everyone was paranoid about sharing information, or like the Kaiser would win, right? And it was kind of data governance out to the masses, the people who had all the data. How can we get that same kind of infectious idea through our organization? How can we empower the data handlers and make the data owners, the VPs or the presidents of the different LOBs, really responsible for their data, and not just, oh, well, it was security's fault and legal didn't have their policy updated and audit wasn't doing the controls. That's where the conversation is today. But those aren't the people who are really moving the data around. So The Beefeaters was just the hook. And the problem that I was trying to address is there's an imbalance between people, process, and technology. We hear a lot about people, process, and technology. It's so overused, but it's kind of true. The balance is out of whack. All through the conference, you hear about people talking about the Blinky boxes. Oh, I got a new Blinky box and I feel safe. Well, the technology bar is way out of whack. And people are really low. Security awareness training, maybe you get 45 minutes once a year at your company. Process, policies are somewhere in the mix, but technology is way up here. Well, with data governance, I kind of found it was kind of a reverse. Policy, process was high. Training was kind of medium, and technology was really low. We didn't have a lot of automated tools. We didn't have a lot of ways to assess or enforce those data governance controls from a technology standpoint. How do we put the spending back in order? So I put together this team, and I wanted to make sure that the organization, I wanted to really facilitate a discussion with the different business units. I wanted to get their engagement, and no one kind of believes their own profit in their village. So I brought in help from the outside. So I engaged the FBI to help with the people part. That's the part where I'm now trying to create the new mental model around what are the threats in the organization, what does good counterintelligence look like, and to share real stories of other organizations that have much more mature security programs but keep falling victim to data breaches. Just because you spend $1 million on firewalls, if an insider gets your data and they walk out with it to a foreign country, you didn't have good data governance around it and you didn't have good control of your data. So the FBI helped create that. The other thing they did was they got the organization to really start to understand the insider threat. My company's 125 years old. We have people that have worked there for 30, 40 years. They are family. And to kind of put that insider threat, to kind of bring that up is, ooh, that's uncomfortable conversation. But you share some stories, you build that mental model, you understand that there's foreign threats, how it works. Now you've established a platform for the people to start. Then process. I chose PwC because they're one of the big four. They're well respected by your C-suite. So when you're looking at your process and building out your policies, looking for what's the right thing to do, they're a great organization to leverage because the C-suite will listen to them. Then I used the SANS 20 critical controls as the technology piece. So once we've established what are the threat models, we've established what's our process, then we want to map the key risks that we've identified through this and apply the right technical controls. So does anyone have any questions so far? Is this resonating? Does anyone else have these struggles with data governance and trying to get the company on board with how do we protect the data? So let me back up. I want to make sure that we've got good audience engagement. I started thinking, if I was hacked and I had to stand in front of the CEO and explain what happened, how embarrassing do I want that to be? So everyone picks on Target, but I think it's really Home Depot, because that guy at Home Depot who didn't make the common adjustments of, why don't we block FTP egress? Because Target, all their credit cards just went out that port. Maybe we shouldn't let our servers do that. Now he has to stand in front of his CEO and be like, well, I kind of knew about this risk for 6 months, and no, I didn't do anything about it. That was my motivation around this. Yeah?
One of the things I've noticed is I have a hard time getting management to understand that we need to protect our data. They are so laser focused on systems and enclaves that they do not understand the insider threats. They don't understand the data, the auditing of the data, and things of that nature. I mean, that's really what people are after ultimately. I mean, it's not about passwords, even though that's what it takes to get to the data. So, you know, they're concerned about PHI, personal health information. They're concerned about PII, privacy impact information. They're concerned about, you know, the things that they're going to get in trouble for lack of better description.
So that's exactly what I'm trying to solve through this talk, is I understood at a high conceptual level PII matters to my company. If we lose this PII, this is going to be the impact. I could talk to other people. They could also be, oh yeah, you know, intellectual property and PII. This is kind of the order of what matters to us. But when I go to justify funding, controls, make changes on how the way people work, could I articulate that in a quantitative way? Could I say if we lost PII over 1,000 records, it would have a moderate to a significant risk, which would be more than a $25 million impact to the organization? Could I score that? And then could we act on that? So that's what we're going to talk about today. You had a question, sir?
I see what the biggest problem is nobody's nuggets on the line if they get their data. That's your biggest problem. When somebody's nuggets on the line, they don't get a rat's ass.
Yes. So that was where I was talking about we need to empower the data handlers, but make the data owners ultimately responsible. So within their reporting structure, they're ensuring that there's the right balance of people, process, and training, which means, are their folks trained? Is there a well-defined process in the organization? And do we have automated controls to help enforce it and ensure it? So the first step I did was the training. How do we get the people in place? How do we create the right mental model so they understand the insider threat? They understand the foreign threat. Then, through this, this is actually all published. It's all non-classified. This is FBI Counterintelligence for Corporate America. There's a great guide out there. You can contact your local FBI bureau. They'll send out an agent and they'll walk you through this process. First thing we did is we stood up a data privacy and CI steering committee. This is made up of those VPs that are data owners. So now they're at the table, they know they're on this committee, the committee has been sponsored by the CFO, which means it has board level visibility. Now their nuggets are on the line, as you said. Now they're all looking around the table and they know, oh boy, this matters. And you've got that FBI person there. It's not just you telling them how bad it is, it's that outsider. And it has weight. So then the next thing you want to do is you want to create that partnership. You want to start embedding these people within your organization. I started first with R&D. And actually, that was how the Beefeaters thing came around. Our director of R&D is British. he's very, very British. And he was the first kind of plant where now you've got a partnership at that level. You make sure that he has a direct contact with somebody within the FBI, somebody within PwC, and somebody within information security. And he is charged with ensuring that his organization follows the processes that have been pre-agreed upon. So now that's kind of goes to the next part, this data governance process. So you want to make sure that you're facilitating a discussion. When I first started this, I started it kind of as an interview. And I was asking them kind of probing questions. And I realized I didn't know enough to really pull the data. And when I would ask maybe a question, and there'd be some side conversation between two people in that department, and one person would be like, oh, you do that? Well, I didn't know we did it that way. I don't do it that way. I do it this way. And it was the side conversations on that side of the table that were the most enlightening pieces of information that came out. You want to guide the different business unit organizations through the process of kind of discovering what is inside their organization. And you want to work with them to try to determine what is the classification criteria, what are the levels of classification that are needed, how are we going to score them, and then how are we going to control them. So at our organization, we had 3 levels of classification. Public, confidential, or public, private, and confidential. And through these discussions, we realized we had a need for a 4th layer of control. Now, this wasn't something that we made this decision, with just legal and IT or audit. This was made through all the businesses. All those business owners sitting around the steering committee table, they all agreed upon, yes, as an organization, there's a need for another level. What's the criteria in that level? What information should go in here, and how should we be able to get to there? So now we started building that framework. So then the next thing we did is we started thinking of, well, okay, these are now our levels. We've agreed upon that. We've agreed upon what kind of information should go in them. How should they be secured? So this is the part you were trying to get to, where I'm asking my organization for this type of data, it should have two-factor authentication, it should have encryption at rest, encryption in motion. These are the controls that should be applied to it. Well, that has a cost, that has resources, and that has constraints, because now the users have to jump through hoops to get it, and it changes the way that they work. It changes business processes, which is really the hardest thing for us to do. It's really easy for us to put that blinky box in the closet that no one thinks, no one sees, and they'll give us a lot of money to do it. But if we ask to change a little business process, whoa, I don't know, that's a sacred cow. Don't touch that. But you need to get that consensus so that way you can do that stuff. So then now you get people to start agreeing upon what are the right controls, kind of the levels of security you're going to put on the data. Yes, sir.
Question just for foundation. Are you referring to more structured data at this point, or are you talking unstructured, where it's basically files and stuff that people are passing around Word documents?
Okay, so it was a great question. Are we talking about structured or unstructured data? So is it individual files, or is it blobs, or is it types? At this level, I'm talking about what the official PwC terminology is a data element. So it is a file that has particular type of information in it. So if we say PII, so now any file that has PII in it, or any file that has this type of ITAR or export control data in it, is part of it. So we haven't got to the discovery phase yet, right? We are still just trying to determine what matters to the organization, how it should be classified, and how to score it. Then we'll have to go out and find all the individual files that meet that criteria, and then apply the controls appropriately, and also make sure, are they in the right locations? Because there's always a federated problem. How many copies of that really confidential data is scattered in places that you aren't really protecting? So now you don't have good awareness of it. So the critical controls is what I followed as the framework, and I did this because it was digestible. Underneath, what I'm really implementing is ISO 27001 and 27002. That's what I was kind of aligning the security program for. But when I'm presenting to leadership and people at that steering committee, it's easier for them to kind of see these 20 controls. They're digestible, it's small enough, it's good little summaries, and then I can map them. There's all kinds of spreadsheets you can get out there. I can share a spreadsheet with you guys that maps the 20 controls to the ISO controls to the brand new NIST cybersecurity controls. So then you can kind of show anyone who comes in and challenges your security program, this is how we're really mapping to the frameworks. And so I can go, this data object is protected by these controls that map to these frameworks. And we can kind of justify how we got there. So defining your critical data. This is now the actionable part. This is the case study part of the talk that I'm hoping that you guys are going to start to kind of challenge me on, interact with, and I'm hoping I can leave you with some tools that you can actually take back and apply. So the first thing I did was let's define it, let's discover it, create a baseline, secure it, monitor it. First step that I did to get started is define what is your critical data and how to score it. So when I presented this to our leadership, you want to start first with what is your kind of 5-year plan? What's the maturity? Have you accomplished some of the baseline things in order to make this successful? Do you have a base to work from? And then why are you now moving to this data governance as a reason? So they can see in a long term, this lines up with what is the strategy for the group. So I'm now focusing on privacy because we've addressed some of the basic things that we had problems. So if your program, if you're bleeding, you don't have perimeter security, you got viruses everywhere, shore up the perimeter. You know, it's kind of that breach triangle idea. Can they get in? Can they get to the data? And can they get out with the data? I really focused on can they get in and can they get out? I put a lot on get out because that was really the best way to find stuff leaving. So now I'm at the point where can they get to the data if they're in the organization? And that was really how I explained it to our leadership so they could understand why we're doing the things in the order we're doing them. Then, okay, what's the roadmap? How are we going to get from here to there? Do we have actually concrete steps? Are there clear phases with gates and measurements to understand if you entrust me with these resources, this is how we're going to execute them. These are going to be the deliverables you're going to get, and this is how you're going to be able to assess if we're, accomplishing this task. The reason that these kind of things are kind of important is you're not talking to IT anymore. If you've got the support to put together a data governance and CI steering committee, you're presenting this to VP level folks that are in charge of their organization, and if they're going to put their nuggets on the line, they want to know why, and they want to make sure you've got a good plan to get there. And then it's not going to just, there's a lot of programs that don't really get to the results. So you want to be able to show them this. And what I also found was we don't do a good enough job in security of selling what we're doing and what we've done. And can my CFO articulate what we're doing? Well, now that I've presented this and everyone in that steering committee at that VP level, if somebody asks them, oh, hey, what's GrafTech doing with security? Oh, they're like, oh, yeah, we're focusing on data governance. We're doing this big privacy initiative. We're working with the FBI. They get it, they know why, and they know how we're doing it. And they can state it in a very simple way. So always think about that. There's a great thing that I learned. If somebody asks you what you do for the company, don't tell them your job title. Tell them how you impact their job. That kind of goes back to this. This whole case study is not so much about how to do data governance and how to do data classification. You guys all know what and how to mechanically do it, but I think the reason that a lot of organizations haven't got over the hurdle is it's how do you tee it up with your management to get the support to actually make it actionable. So these kind of slides set that stage. So then what we did was through facilitating the discussions with all of the different leaders, the people who are now going to be responsible for the data, get them to agree upon it. I apologize that this is kind of an eye chart, but I wanted to kind of show this. The slides will be available, or contact me and I can get them to you. So across the top, we have what is the description, what are the sample documents, how should they be marked, how should they be reproduced, how should they be distributed, how should they be stored, and how should they be destroyed. Now, if you look across there, there's one column, a very important column that's missing. It's retention. We haven't quite figured that out. We don't have complete agreement on all this, but this was a case where let's not let great get in the way of good. This got us a lot further than we had. I know it looks like an eye chart, but when you print this out on a nice 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, now it's something people can hang up in their office. It's something they can keep handy at their desk, and now they can reference it quickly. And they can go down and they can quickly see what's a sample document. Is this intellectual property? Is this PII? Does this have this kind of thing? How should it be marked? Am I using the right marking? Where should it be stored? Am I allowed to reproduce it? How's it destroyed? Now we have a tool, and it's easily reproduced, it's easily communicated, it's easily trained upon, and people can reference it quickly. Yeah?
Many of the business areas have taken it and tweaked it for their own.
That's okay. The whole start of this is you want to get the consensus across all the lines of business. So none of the groups will take this and tweak it for their own needs. We created a master set that everyone agreed upon at the steering committee. If there's a member of the steering committee that sees something that doesn't work right for their organization, we will make sure that it gets adjusted at the master record, because we don't want one business unit doing something different. We need to keep it consistent across the organization. There was too much different, and then you now have people with different opinions of what matters and how it should be protected. And this evolution is, my organization doesn't have a DLP solution yet. And I kind of made the argument, we weren't ready for a DLP solution because I didn't have this. How can I accurately monitor what's leaving my organization and what's the value of that if we haven't gone through this and we haven't agreed upon it? So if I stop a piece of data and we kind of now build out a DLP and I use this as the map, it'll be a lot more effective than if I just kind of guessed at what IT thought was important to the company. So we try to make sure that this has the consensus, and that's why we really facilitated discussions and allowed the data owners, the ones who now are responsible, really created this. Legal, IT, and audit just guided it. Oh, yeah. Big culture piece. So I'm going to tell a quick story. So Betty Crocker, the people who make the cake mix, they are famous. You go to the store, you buy the box, bring it home, crack open the eggs, you whip it up, put it in the oven, you got a cake and you love it, and you're like, I made this cake. Well, in the engineering group at Betty Crocker, they came up with a way where now you don't have to add the egg. We'll put this on the shelf. People are going to love it. All they got to do is just plop it into a bowl, put it in the oven, they got a cake. It bombed. Sales went through the floor. People hated it. You didn't let the customer add their egg. This was something that I was missing earlier. I was bringing more complete solutions to the table and not leaving enough room for each of the different LOBs to add their egg, to give them an opportunity to contribute to the final product, so now they have ownership of it. So this, they don't go, oh, this is what legal and IT told us to do. They're like, we created this. This is ours. That's there. I put that there. Give them room to add their own egg. Now they want, it's theirs. So now they don't have to fight it. It's not like, oh, we're adopting what they told us to do. They helped create it. They'll take ownership of it. So, scoring. This is huge. This is hard. Okay, if your organization's mature enough to have an enterprise risk management group, the enterprise risk management group has probably already created this. I was fortunate enough that we had one, and I was able to kind of use it. If you don't have an enterprise risk management group, this is where you need to kind of start putting it together. At that steering committee, and you'll also probably need to have the CEO and the CFO as part of this particular meeting. What you're trying to determine is, what is the material impact of the organization? So if this dollar amount happened, what would be the impact to the company? Now, if you're a publicly traded company, your 10K statement, you are now encouraged by the SEC to put in a 10K blurb about cybersecurity, that these certain things, if they happen, will report to the SEC if there's a breach, and if that breach has a certain monetary value, will it impact the value of the stock? So some of that calculations have already been done. Now, the numbers I put up here, those are made up. Everything I've put up here, I've had to sanitize and change around. We're over $1 billion organization. Our numbers are a lot bigger, but you can kind of get the idea of the scale. You want these numbers to be big. If you're saying it is a significant impact, it better be a significant impact. Like, oh wow, we have to go tell the board we just lost a quarter of our revenue, or a third of the revenue or something. It needs to really matter. And the reason you want these numbers to be there is because now you have a way to hold people accountable. A lot of folks, you'll ask them, oh, well, what are you working on? What's your data? What's important to you? Oh, it's the most important thing to the company. Oh, it's got to be restricted. It's got to be heavily guarded. We'd have a big impact. But when you start, well, what is the impact? What's the dollar? What would it really be? Yeah.
Are these single loss expectancies?
Single, both. So in a lot of times, it's more, there's never a single loss in business, right? There's going to be, is there litigation? Was there a lawsuit? Was there fines ongoing for the amount of days, months, or years that you had this outstanding? Or if we lost this piece of intellectual property and it prevented us, to go to market, or prevented us from being able to continue in that market space, what is that revenue for that product line? So we absolutely look at it kind of in a longer view, so that way the numbers can get there. Because for a lot of that stuff, you want to understand what's going to be the bigger impact, so that way it's what would matter to the board. What's the ongoing incoming revenue or outgoing penalties over that period of that breach. Now the next thing is likelihood. So if we've now determined, if we lost this piece of IP, let's say it has a moderate impact to the organization, and this piece of IP generates less than $5 million annually in product revenue. Well, now let's look at likelihood. How often do we see this IP in places it shouldn't? Now, you don't have to always play, oh, it was breached. Well, we've never lost any IP. You know, that was one of the questions. Well, that never happened. It's the lowest. But then I'm like, well, have you ever seen something that shouldn't have been forwarded to someone that got forwarded to them through email because they didn't realize it was attached and they shouldn't have saw it? Did you ever see it in a share drive that it shouldn't have been on? Did you ever see it go to the printer and they didn't use secure print? Okay, it never left the organization, but you have clear examples of, maybe we weren't as good with it as we could. So look through the likelihood game, that's why you want all of the data handlers at the table, and you want to let them have the conversation amongst themselves, because they'll find where this point is. You're only giving them the map to let them kind of use the tools. The next thing is the control. What is your process? Do we have a well-defined process? Or is it kind of loosely defined? Is it kind of ad hoc? Where are we at with this? So now you have an idea of what would be the impact, what's the likelihood of it happening, and what's the control. And you see here on the side, we've got the numbers, 5 through 1. So then all you do is you just use simple multiplication. Impact times likelihood times control gives you a score. Now, this is the data elements inventory. This is it. This is what is going to make your lives as security professionals a lot easier. So you're going to talk to each one of the business units. You're going to want to spend at least 3-4 hours with them. You want to talk to the data handlers, and you want the data owner to be in the room. And you're going to sit down and you're going to ask them, what is important inside of your shop? And you start identifying, it's not the files, it's kind of more that higher level elements, right? So what would be a crown jewel to you guys? What's the biggest thing? And then you walk them through the process. So we have a paragraph description for what is public, internal, confidential, and restricted. So everyone has this in front of them. I have all this stuff printed out so everyone has it to reference. So they see what is our agreed upon definition that came out of the steering committee. Then we have a little simple on and off button of, is it regulatory? Because that'll change some scoring. Is it regulatory, yes or no? Then we start to use the scoring. So if we look across here like a technical crown jewel, we go through, is it restricted? Yes, everyone agrees based on the definition it should be restricted. Is it regulatory? No. And then impact would be 4, likelihood 4, and control 4, score, this one got a 64. Now through the steering committee and through our scoring, it was agreed upon that anything that got a score greater than a 36 would get board level visibility. That was agreed upon, and that was how we're going to manage to this. So now no one in the organization can be like, well, I didn't know that, wow, that was this. Oh no, we weren't watching that. We weren't funding that. And now your business leaders, the guys who are doing all the other stuff, now when they come and they talk to you, you can go right to this heat map and they can be like, how's the project going to protect the stuff that's above a 32? How's that going? Are we good? And now you can start to really focus the conversation because they know, at least in my organization, if it's above a 36, we're going to have a greater than $25 million impact. That's a significant material impact. Now we can talk in actual quantified numbers. Now, at the bottom of the slide here, I pasted this in because we didn't just find the data elements and score them. We also wanted to know who's the information owner, whose nuggets are on the line. We wanted to know who's the information manager, right? That's the person who's going to handle the data, and that's the person who's going to validate these are the people who have the data, I've given them the rights, and I review who still has rights to this data. They're the ones that are kind of that custodian, and they're the ones that oversee and watch the data. Then we want to know what's the information users. What groups and what other individuals with the organization need access to this data? Because then we can start to kind of, we want to get to RBAC, right? I want to get the role-based authentication. And if I don't have a map to know this group maps to here, I can't really start controlling down data. Because what I really want to do is the stuff that we've put in restricted, and we made the scoring for restricted really hard. Like, it is going to, we're probably going to have to let the SEC know something happened if it's in the restricted category. And we purposely did that. We wanted to make that the smallest basket and the hardest criteria to reach to get into that restricted zone, because everyone agreed it was going to be the ones that had the most technical controls, which means it was going to be the most headache for users to access. And it's also now going to be the smallest number of users. Storage locations. Where is it allowed to be stored? Other possible places it could be stored, because maybe it's in a document format, maybe there's some other things other than just digital. And then we also talked about where future state, where should this data be stored? The reason what we asked the two questions of where is it kind of stored and where are some of the other possibilities it can be stored is because we have to do the discovery phase that you were asking about. How do we map, okay, we have this element that we've determined, well now we're going to discover it, and we need to find all the files, and we kind of want to know where to look, and then we're going to determine, well, where should they all go once we found them. So that kind of goes to the quote you always hear, you can't protect what you don't know is there. I kind of made the analogy, you really need to know what the value is of what you're protecting so you have a reason to go find it. The exercise to find the data, no one wants to clean up or find data. Well, if I go and tell somebody this particular piece of data is worth $25 million, oh, we can bring in some resources to find that data. You need to have the numbers. So this scoring and this data elements inventory, this is the greatest piece of work product that came out of the project for me and for the other implementers, because it was now a consensus that everyone agreed upon. Everyone agreed on the scoring. They agreed on the definitions of how it was classified, and they agreed on how it was protected. So now, that first thing I said of people, process, and technology were out of alignment, and we had spending going to the wrong places, well now I can use this to kind of check against where is our spending, and are we putting it in the right places. And I kind of list it down the side. Those are all just kind of generic things to kind of give you a what to look for. One thing that kind of caught us by surprise when we were going through this, litigation discovery. Our ability to do it scored really high. No one would have thought that to begin with. We have discovery tools. We've never had a problem with e-discovery. We've never had a problem with this kind of stuff. But when we started kind of talking it out, we realized as a company, if we had a problem with it, it would be a big impact. So there was some things that kind of jumped out. Also like PII. Now, my company's a manufacturing company. Intellectual property is really core. Employee data, customer data matters. But when we started to score it, we had to be over like 1,000 records before we even got into the place where we could do the math to put a number of value on it that would, get to a good scoring point. Because if we lost a single record and you look at what the cost is of that, it wasn't enough. So you want to make sure you kind of put the weights on certain things so it has enough impact so when you're talking to someone, they get a sense of it needs to be this size of a breach. Let's see. Investor relations stuff, board of directors, corporate minutes, your product drawings, technical information, anything that's ITAR, export control. Yeah.
So, just real practical, how would you see the business turning around and actually using this? Is this one per application, one per data store out on NAS, one per SharePoint? How do you see it playing out?
Okay, so what we did was once we built this inventory, we created a heat map, and we went across all the LOBs, and we put together one kind of holistic view that everyone agreed upon, and then we kind of scored it. And like I said, anything that was above a 36, that's what we're going to focus on first. So any of the data that got into that highest level of scoring, that was our priority. And then what we did was we're like, okay, let's start discovering that data, and then let's start making sure that that data now only exists in a single place. And then now let's start applying the appropriate controls to that data.
So you're way up at the level of talking with a business leader who's saying, I think I have this type of information that's out there. It could be on NAS, it could be in SharePoint, it could be in a data warehouse.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Go
So real quick, let me go back here.
I'm just thinking too specific.
This is a 3-year initiative. I've just finished phase 1 and I'm starting phase 2. Phase 1 was that whole governance and assessment. How do we get agreed upon scoring? How do we get agreed upon classification? How do we get that data inventory? This is the first start of the process. And one of the things that I was challenged with is when I first started to try to do this and I was going to other groups trying to kickstart this, no one had time. I had to actually start doing it on my own, and then others started following once they saw the flywheel was moving, and we also had that hook, that Beefeater's hook. It sounded good, and then you've got to find a champion in the business that wants to support you. So I got lucky with our R&D. I knew that was where our most important data was. Everyone in the company knew that was our most important data was. So this individual, he had a high level of awareness, and he wanted to help. That was the person that I made the alliance with that really got the project kicked off. Because you need to get it started, but then you also need someone in the business that's willing to say, I'll give you some time. We'll bring some teammates in and we'll get this thing started. So it's a journey. It's a long process. It's something you're not going to do quickly. It takes a lot of decisioning. So kind of in summary, just get started. I mean, you guys can do this. It's made a big impact in our organization, and it's changed the way we talk about data now, and it's changed the way that we prioritize what we're working on. Because I don't know if you guys are like me, but in security, we had too many priorities. We had too many priorities. It was hard. This gave us a better place to talk from, and it gave us now a more common language to interact with the business with. So can I get some more questions? Can I get some feedback? That's pretty much it for me. Yeah.
This is great. I love this. You've got a few things going on here, and I'd like to make a comment regarding the organizational change component of this. So where a lot of these type of things tend to fail is when they're purely top-down. Where a lot of any kind of organizational change will fail is where it's purely top-down. Okay, the big boss says this, and the people with boots on the ground say, what are they thinking? Well, I better just do it. Right, and they throw their hands up in the air, and you end up with a situation of malicious compliance where they're doing exactly what they're told, and the train goes right off the tracks because people who dictated it didn't quite understand exactly what the process needed to be on an operational level. So what I really loved to see was where you said you went and you had the data owner and the data handler in the room together, and you scored everything with the data handler. It gave them, first of all, you were gathering information from the data handler in such a way as they were the one informing the process, and they knew that for the more important data that they were handling, the trust board was going to see this, and this is going to be a big deal, and so that's empowering for them. And then, secondly, it showed them, if they didn't appreciate before, even as they're informing, it's feeding back to them of, oh, gee, this thing I do every day is important to the company. What I would suggest, and I assume, given how well you've already done with all this, what I would suggest is as you get into stages 2 and 3, and it goes up, and the board looks at all this and says, presumably, that yes, this is very important, go forth and continue, that it comes back to those data handlers again, and they can see in the same kind of format that here is the information that you gave us and went all the way up the chain and has now come back to you, and we're doing it pretty much the way you said, and that message is there, because now you have buy-in, and on an ongoing operational basis, they're going to continue to be invested in this process. And if something starts changing, if something environmental starts changing, they're going to raise their hand and be like, hey, this has changed, and this is more important now, or we need to do something about this, as opposed to starting to maliciously comply because, well, you guys did this thing, and I have to do it.
So I want to reiterate some of that so it gets onto the video, because that was brilliant, what you said. And I'm going to kind of summarize it, but don't butcher it. The essential need for a feedback loop to ensure that the people who have to enact the process are not enacting a process that goes against how they do their job because someone else defined the process that doesn't understand how they work. And that's what happened. we had discussions with R&D, and we had discussions with legal and all these different groups. And one of the things they said was data that has classified or restricted will never be sent in email. You will send a link to where it is in our SharePoint, and you have to access it that way. And everyone was like, oh, this is going to be great, and we're going to save size on email, and people won't accidentally forward stuff because they have to log in to now get it. We were so excited. Well, then we sat down with financial, and we started to see how they move like new employment records and employee setups and, you know, like how you get paid. And they were like, wait a minute, we can't email that? That's how we work. That was the feedback loop. And that was why I said the chart you saw, and you were like, well, is it different for a different organization? Well, we don't want it to be different. We want to make sure we fold everybody in, we listen to all the voices, and in there, the reason there was like big blocks of text that you couldn't read is because we did get into the details. For intellectual property, we'll never email it. But for PII data, that's okay as long as it's encrypted email. So we didn't take away a process on how they do their business because we had the feedback loop that is essential, because if you bake it in a vacuum, you're going to put it out there and people are just going to go around it. And now you've actually made things worse. So that was an excellent point. Anyone else?
I found it interesting. I think it's great that you're starting with this before classification. Before putting a DLP in place, and we're in the opposite state where we had DLP out there for a long time. Very effective at certain things. You don't get, you don't have enough context to know how to stop. So take an SSN or something well-defined, like a credit card number, and block that. Great, good job. But the other piece that, as far as the labeling and such, there are tools out there that are starting to mature that allow you
The metadata.
to manage metadata. Have you begun to explore those?
Yes. And that's what we started, where I put there was a box there called markings. We wanted to make sure if it had a classification, now how is it going to be marked? Because we needed to ensure stuff was marked uniformly so we can find it better. We'll have the metadata of all the more kind of nuanced details, but at a high level, let's just make sure it's got the right watermark. So if it ends up on a copier or it ends up in someone's office not secured, people can see it, and we can also find it real quick with DLP tools. Anyone else? Yeah, Paul.
Just an observation. I noticed on the chart for markings, I think the public and the next one, private.
Yeah.
Is it none?
None.
Is there a danger that there might be an assumption if it's not marked that it's one of those?
We went with again, this is something where we were active participants. We tried, IT and legal were actively trying not to influence too much. We wanted the business to have more of the say in how it was. They felt because we generate so much material, if we were asking people to mark stuff that was just maybe a private, that's going to become a little onerous. It's going to become too hard. And then when we actually talked to some other legal folks, they actually said that is a good stance because you're better to have a rule, or it's better not to have a rule than to have a rule that can be shown that you weren't enforcing, right? So it was to keep it simple. The businesses kind of said, private, that's a bit too much. And then we actually found out later that from legal, it's probably even better because now we can't be caught if they find a certain percentage of documents that we weren't following it because it annihilates everything else. So that was where we had to step down a little bit. And this is going to be an evolution. It's going to constantly be changing, but we have a place to start the conversation from. All right, so I think we're about done, guys. Anything? Yes?
Do you have any data classification things that surprised you?
Oh, lots. So when we started scoring, and when we had it was, like I said, it was really allowing the discussions to happen within that organization. There's not a lot of times where you get everyone together in the room, you kick the meeting off with an FBI agent that creates this mental model where now they're afraid of insider and foreign threats. You have the PwC guy give about 45 minutes of how to use the tools, then you let them talk. And I started with the interviewing, and I found that I was just getting in their way. You train them, you give them the process. These are smart folks. They know their world way better. And you let them apply it, and things come out. Stuff that we thought was kind of benign, when we started really applying it, and we started taking the longer view of what would be the long-term revenue loss of this? What would be, the legal impact of this? What would be the reputational impact? And then we also started looking at what's the likelihood. And the one for us was, it's controls. We have a lot of tribal knowledge. We have people that have worked there forever, that they religiously do the same thing in the same way, and they make sure the next person's trained, and they do it the same. Is it written down? Is it formally trained? Is it audited against? But what's crazy is when we'd go out and we'd actually, I want to see this. Sure enough, they really did it great every time. But it wasn't formal. We couldn't really put down that it was formal. So the control number would be a good multiplier that would bump stuff up usually. And now when we go to the business and we can talk to them about that, they can see the scoring. And we can justify, well, hey, look, the material impact is dealable, likelihood's dealable, it's your control. This is the risk to the company, which gave you a score that has board visibility. Can we work together to fix this? It gives you a place to have these conversations and to start from. Yeah. I got to go. Thank you.